Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the July meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, will you lead us through the day, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 2 items and a list of items listed under consent agenda for your consideration. First, you will consider a report and order on reconsideration, third order on reconsideration, and a third report and order that provides meaningful opportunities for small businesses, rural telephone companies, and businesses owned by members of minority groups and women to participate in the provision of spectrum-based services, and also strengthens the Commission's rules to protect against unjust enrichment to ineligible entities. Second, you will consider an enforcement item. The Commission also has before it today a consent agenda consisting of the items listed under consent agenda on the Commission's Sunshine Notice released on July 9, 2015. This is your agenda for today. Please note items 1 and 2 on the Commission's Sunshine Notice have been deleted from today's agenda. The first item will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. It is entitled Updating Part 1, Competitive Bidding Rules, Expanding the Economic and Innovation Opportunities of Spectrum Through Incentive Auctions. Roger Sherman, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Sherman.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. It's my pleasure to introduce this report and order, which updates the Commission's Part 1 Competitive Bidding Rules. In October of last year, the Commission initiated a proceeding to modernize its rules to meet its statutory obligation to ensure that small businesses, rural telephone companies, and businesses owned by members of minority groups and women have an opportunity to participate in the provision of spectrum-based services while also maintaining adequate safeguards to prevent unjust enrichment. The proceeding also took a fresh look at the Commission's competitive bidding rules generally and sought comment on changes that could enhance the transparency, efficiency, and integrity of FCC auctions. Ultimately, the challenge of this proceeding was to update our rules in a way that would allow innovative, smaller companies an opportunity to build wireless businesses that spur additional investment and bring more choices to consumers. Today's report and order reflects the significant input we received from the public and addresses this challenge by adopting a balanced approach in modernizing and reforming the Commission's Part 1 rules to reflect profound changes in the wireless industry since the rules were last updated nearly 10 years ago. I'm joined at the table by Jim Schlichting, Senior Deputy Chief in the Wireless Bureau, Sue McNeil, Special Counsel in the Wireless Bureau, Margie Weiner, Chief of the Auctions Division, Leslie Barnes, an Attorney in the Auctions and Spectrum Access Division, and Joel Taubenblatt, Chief of the Competition and Infrastructure Division. In addition to the team at the table, several Wireless Bureau team members and our colleagues in OGC contributed to this item, working long hours to complete this report and order under tight time constraints. In particular, I would like to thank Kelly Quinn, Audrey Bashkin, Valerie Barish, Bill Huber, Audra Hale-Maddox, and Christian Segura in the Auctions Division, Patrick Donovan in the Broadband Division, Michael Jansen and Karen Sprung in the Competition and Infrastructure Division, and Joanna Thomas and Jean Cadu in our front office for their leadership and hard work drafting this report and item. Leslie will present the item. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
As Roger indicated, this report and order updates the Commission's Part 1 competitive bidding rules. Based on the comments in the record in response to both the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking and the public notice, this report and order reflects the profound changes in the wireless industry over the last decade. Through these changes and in furtherance of our statutory obligations, this report and order provides meaningful opportunities for bona fide small businesses and eligible rural service providers, including businesses owned by members of minority groups and women, collectively referred to as designated entities, or DEs, to participate in auctions and in the provision of spectrum-based services. The report and order also adopts reforms to ensure that DE bidding credits flow only to those intended by Congress in order to prevent unjust enrichment. First, the report and order eliminates the attributable material relationship rule, or AMR rule, which required a per se bright line attribution of revenues to a DE applicant, and instead adopts a 2-pronged test using a totality of the circumstances analysis to evaluate an entity's eligibility for and retention of small business benefits on a license-by-license basis. In addition, the report and order adopts a new attribution rule to serve as an additional safeguard to prevent ineligible entities from benefiting from bidding credits to which they are not entitled. Under the new rule, the revenues of a disclosable interest holder in a DE applicant or licensee will become attributable on a license-by-license basis if it uses more than 25% of the spectrum capacity of a license awarded with bidding credits during the unjust enrichment period. Second, the report and order updates our small business size standards to better reflect the capital-intensive nature of the wireless industry while retaining the Commission's overall three-tiered approach. The report and order also adopts a new bidding credit for eligible rural service providers to increase their participation in auctions and to provide greater opportunities for improving wireless services in rural areas. Moreover, the report and order adopts, for the first time, a cap on the monetary amount of DE bidding credits the Commission will award in future auctions. For the incentive auction, the cap will be $150 million for eligible small businesses and $10 million for rural service providers. To ensure parity between small businesses and rural service providers, there will be a $10 million cap on the bidding credits in smaller markets. With respect to the Commission's unjust enrichment rules, the report and order concludes that the existing 5-year unjust enrichment schedule provides a sufficient safeguard to ensure that only bona fide small businesses and eligible rural service providers benefit from the Commission's DE program. In addition, the report and order prohibits joint bidding, including arrangements that address or communicate bids or bidding strategies, arrangements regarding price and specific licenses on which to bid, as well as any arrangements relating to the post-auction market structure. The report and order will continue to permit DEs to form consortia and allow non-nationwide providers to participate in joint ventures with other non-nationwide providers, both of which will result in a single bidder for any future auction. Finally, the report and order prohibits multiple applications by one party and by parties with commonly controlled interests, subject to certain exceptions. The Wireless Telecommunications Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mars. Thank you to all of you for the hard work that went into this. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congress recognized more than 20 years ago that advanced telecommunications services and wireless technologies had the potential to create tremendous opportunities in our nation. Though smartphones, tablets, millions of mobile broadband apps, and the Internet of Everything may not have been part of their predictions back then, even though the chair might take credit for knowing all of these things, lawmakers knew that in order for all communities to benefit from technological innovation, the FCC's obligation to allocate spectrum in the public interest should be guided by key enduring principles. Most relevant are the ones which affirm that all consumers should have access to affordable service, entrepreneurs and small businesses should have a reasonable opportunity to own and provide communication services, and that rigorous competition can promote both of these policy goals. So when Congress amended the Communications Act in the 1990s, giving the Commission the authority to conduct spectrum auctions, it specifically mandated that we design them to promote economic opportunity and competition, ensure that new and innovative technologies are readily accessible to the American people, avoid excessive concentration of licenses, disseminate licenses among a wide variety of applicants, including small businesses, and deter unjust enrichment. In implementing these mandates, the Commission has attempted to promote small business participation in the wireless industry primarily by awarding auction bidding credits through its designated entity program. And these efforts have led to some inspiring successes. Take Leap Wireless. It identified an entirely new strategy in the wireless industry through a simple, affordable, worry-free service. Priced competitively with traditional home phone service, Cricket let customers make and receive virtually unlimited phone calls in their local service area. It achieved strong penetration and brand awareness in its first 2 markets of Chattanooga and Nashville, and the company quickly set in motion plans to launch service in 8 more markets by the end of 2000. By the close of 2001, they offered service in 35 markets. In late 2000, LEAP actively sought to acquire additional wireless operating licenses across this nation. They participated in the FCC's re-auction of the, quote, Entrepreneurs Block, PCS operating licenses, a program that was also designed to help small businesses compete for spectrum, just like the DE program. LEAP's then CEO and chairman credited this Entrepreneurs Block with allowing them to expand aggressively. LEAP went on to sell their Cricket service to AT&T in 2014, but not before becoming a staple in the prepaid wireless market, serving more than 4.5 million customers nationally. The LEAP story is one of a small, innovative company, identifying an unserved market, developing an inventive business model, growing into a significant market player, and in the process, providing competition and innovation in a dynamic marketplace. This is exactly the kind of story the Designated Entity Program is designed to make possible. The challenge for this commission, however, has been to find the proper balance between allowing small businesses to acquire spectrum through DE credits on the one hand, and preventing parties from circumventing the purpose of those rules and being unjustly enriched on the other. However, between 2004 and 2006, our policy changes actually shifted this balance, and it impacted small business participation tremendously, and not for the better. A number of parties told us that the current rules are actually having an adverse effect on small businesses, right at a time when these entities are facing increased challenges to compete effectively in the commercial wireless industry and serve their target markets. That is why, since 2010, I've been calling on this commission to consider creative and legally sustainable approaches to promote greater participation by small businesses in the communications industry. I applaud Chairman Wheeler today for presenting, that's another issue between us, but presenting us with an order which contains comprehensive reforms to the Commission's competitive bidding rules that will enable small businesses to compete more effectively. At the top of the list are the elimination of the attributable material relationship rule and the policies that DEs must use the licenses they win with DE credits to provide facilities-based retail service. As I mentioned at the start of this proceeding, there is absolutely nothing in the statute or in the legislative history that requires us to adopt those policies. But what we do have is the authority to change policies when it is evident that consolidation in the wireless industry and other circumstances warrant giving small businesses greater ability to raise capital and effectively compete. I am also pleased that we are adopting a rule bidding credit for non-DEs with 250,000 or fewer subscribers. In last year's notice, I was particularly pleased that we sought comment on bidding credits to winning bidders that deploy facilities in persistent poverty areas. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, a county is persistently poor if 20% or more of its population has been living in poverty over the last 30 or more years. Currently, there are approximately 353 such counties in this country. Although the record in this proceeding did not provide sufficient comment on how we should design a credit to promote deployment in these counties, as the order explains, the rule bidding credit covers over 90% of these counties. The wireless industry often talks about how deployment of their networks creates jobs and spurs economic growth. So I hope that this credit will create incentives to deploy more networks in these communities. While I fully support most of the rule changes in the orders, Our decision for the first time to impose a cap on the amount of bidding credits that a DE may claim at auction still does concern me. I recognize that the intent of this cap is to deter some of the alleged activity that people have criticized in the AWS-3 auction, but I am confident that the other rule changes we adopt today are sufficient to remedy those concerns. Most notably, we are prohibiting DEs from entering into bidding arrangements with other entities. We are also informing parties that some agreements that restrict the ability of DEs to make certain operational decisions could lead us to find that the DE does not control its license. The timing for the first cap in the history of the DE program, also concerns me because AWS-3 resulted in a record-setting $41.3 billion, and since below 1 gigahertz spectrum is more valuable, it is reasonable to surmise that the total provisioning winning bids for the incentive auction could be higher. That means DEs will need access to more capital to win licenses. That being said, the rules we adopt today will give more flexibility to small businesses to enter into models that should allow them to acquire licenses and thrive in the commercial wireless industry. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I am voting to approve. I wish to thank Roger Sherman, Jane Kiddo, Sue McNeil, and the rest of the team in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, along with my lead advisor, Louis Peretz, who has not had one good day of his vacation, and David Strickland for their terrific work throughout this proceeding. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for being our North Star on this issue. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
It has been nearly a decade since the Commission last updated its competitive bidding rules. And what a difference a decade makes. At the time, flip phones were state of the art. Movie rentals involved a trip to the neighborhood Blockbuster, and viewing them was limited to the television screen. No one imagined the range of daily activities we now conduct on our wireless devices. The economic force of the Internet of Things was no more than a dream from the far-off future. But that future is now. So it's the right time to revisit our decade-old rules governing competitive bidding in wireless auctions. We do that here by modernizing our policies in a way that is consistent with our statutory obligations under Section 309. Our reforms provide designated entities with flexibility that they need to thrive in a wireless marketplace that has changed. They also ensure that only the entities Congress intended to assist will receive the benefits of designated entity status. In addition, for the first time ever, we ensure that rural service providers have a special opportunity to qualify for bidding credits when they provide service to rural communities. These reforms are smart, balanced, and fair. But to increase the opportunity these policies can provide, we need to increase the spectrum pipeline. We have, of course, a big auction on the horizon that involves choice airwaves in the 600 megahertz band. But we need to think beyond this one auction, and we need to do so now. We need to find ways to speed the process of repurposing more spectrum for mobile broadband use, and we need to do so by providing federal users with incentives to be more efficient with their airwaves so they will see gain and not just loss in reallocation. After all, with more spectrum in the pipeline, we will have more airwaves to auction and more opportunities for designated entities in the wireless sector. So thank you to the Bureau for a terrific job. This has my support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's no secret that the FCC's designated entity, or DE program, has been plagued by abuse. You don't need to look any further than our most recent spectrum auction to see that large corporations routinely try to game the system and gain access to discounted spectrum. Who bears the cost of this abuse? Legitimate small businesses across the country. Businesses that are actually building networks and serving their communities. Businesses like Glenwood Telephone in Nebraska and Rainbow Telecommunications in my home state of Kansas. American taxpayers also take a hit, since we all pay the price when corporate giants snag discounts that Congress never intended them to have. So the last thing one would expect when the designated entity program has once again been rocked by corporate gamesmanship is for the FCC to reopen loopholes it closed on a bipartisan basis years ago, loopholes that led to wide-ranging abuses in past auctions. Yet here we are. We were promised FCC action to close loopholes exploited by slick lawyers. Instead, we have the FCC's blessing of new loopholes through which even a minimally competent attorney could drive a truck. In particular, this order paves the way for DEs to obtain a 35% taxpayer-funded discount on auction spectrum and then turn around and immediately lease 100% of that spectrum to AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, or T-Mobile. Let me repeat that. They can turn around and immediately lease every bit of that spectrum to AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, and T-Mobile. And so I ask, will it further the public interest to allow a small business with no plan beyond regulatory arbitrage to purchase discounted spectrum and then flip it to our nation's largest wireless carriers? Let's see. Will that large wireless carrier face increased competition when it leases the spectrum? No. Will it face competitive pressure on its pricing? No. Will consumers, including those new areas, have a new competitive alternative to choose from? No. Will eliminating the safeguard reserve the DE program for companies that actually intend to use their spectrum to serve customers, as former Commissioner Michael Copps put it when he and his fellow commissioners established these very rules? Quite the opposite. But I don't want to be accused of focusing solely on what today's decision won't do. So let me shift gears and discuss what voting in favor of 100% leasing will do. Will it increase concentration in the wireless market? Yes. Will it mean that large companies can access discounted spectrum rather than purchasing it at full price? Yes. Will it make the politically well-connected owners of Shell DEs very wealthy? Yes. And will it create new incentives for companies to continue to try to game the system? Absolutely. Here is why I'll be dissenting today. First, the Commission's decision to eliminate the facilities-based requirement is yet another example of the agency rejecting a long-standing bipartisan consensus. As I mentioned, Commissioner Copps and his colleagues put many of these protections in place. Commissioner Copps spoke eloquently against abuse of the designated entity program. He noted that Congress created the program to promote competition by small businesses against larger established providers, competition that would spur the deployment of new services to the public, including in rural and underserved areas. Commissioner Copps saw the tendency of companies with, as he put it, deep pockets to help themselves to discounts they were never meant to enjoy and to twist the rules in order to gain unwarranted entry into these programs. He observed that this abuse means that spectrum goes to those most willing and able to manipulate the rules of the game, rather than to the entities Congress actually intended to benefit. And so, Commissioner Copps acted to end it. Most importantly, the FCC reserved the DE program for companies that actually intend to use their spectrum to serve customers. How did our predecessors do this? They barred DEs from leasing 100% of their discounted spectrum to large corporations. But today, the Commission decides on a party line vote to jettison the very safeguard that Commissioner Copps pioneered. This will invite more abuse. Just look at the record. Public interest advocates explained that allowing 100% leasing would do little to discourage a DE from acquiring spectrum at a taxpayer-funded discount and flipping it to someone else at full market value. They explained that it would be terrible for taxpayers who would be underwriting corporate welfare and for consumers who would not see valuable spectrum put to its most productive uses. T-Mobile said that allowing 100% leasing effectively would gut the purpose of the designated entity program and increase the likelihood that designated entity benefits unfairly flow to ineligible entities or to speculators that acquire or warehouse spectrum at the expense of actual service providers that really need it. Still others remarked that allowing these leasing arrangements will, quote, act like catnip to spectrum opportunists who are less interested in serving underserved areas than with getting rich quick at the public's expense. Dozens of smaller and rural providers echoed these same concerns, and they urged the FCC not to eliminate the facilities-based requirement. Yet down the drain it goes. Now, the order's defense, to be fair, is that the Commission's predictive judgment that DEs will not be able to build viable, competitive wireless businesses unless they are allowed to lease all of their spectrum to large nationwide carriers is the case. But putting aside the question of who the DE is actually competing against when it leases all of its spectrum to an incumbent provider, I'll concede that it is hard to argue with predictive judgments. Except, that is, when they run contrary to actual facts. Legitimate DEs like VTEL in Vermont, Bugs Island Telephone in Virginia, Chariton Valley in Missouri, and Sandhill Communications in South Carolina, as well as many other facilities-based providers across the country, can certainly be forgiven if they don't agree with the FCC that their businesses are not viable. Nor do statements in the order about consolidation in the wireless industry counsel in favor of eliminating the facilities-based requirement. Ditching the rule only increases market concentration, since, as I noted, spectrum will simply be flipped from smaller providers to the largest wireless carriers in the country. Second, prohibiting DEs from leasing 100% of their spectrum is not just sound policy. It also happens to be the law. As I explained in greater detail in my written statement, the FCC has consistently and unanimously read Section 309J of the Communications Act as requiring DEs to have significant involvement in the provision of services to the public, not merely passive ownership of a license to spectrum used by others to provide service. Indeed, Commissioner Copps read the Communications Act as providing no legal justification, his words, for permitting DEs or any other provider to lease any of their spectrum without specific Commission approval of each such lease. Until today. The decades-long bipartisan consensus on the law is brushed aside in one short paragraph by the order on the theory that all prior commissioners, Democrats and Republicans alike, simply placed undue weight on certain legislative history. But even a cursory read of our precedents and a look at the legislative history confirms that the Communications Act, the Commission's interpretation of the Communications Act, was grounded in the plain language of the statute, not on tea leaves from the congressional record. Next, the order doesn't enact real reform. And to be sure, the order does take some worthwhile measures. Yes, we should prohibit a company from bidding through multiple auction participants. Yes, we should prevent an individual from serving as an authorized bidder for more than one applicant. And yes, we should require an applicant to certify that it's not involved in any way in the bidding strategy of more than one bidder. But we shouldn't pat ourselves on the back for prohibiting collusive conduct already subject to the criminal provisions of antitrust law. These fruits don't hang much lower. For me, this proceeding has never been about ending certain types of abuse while opening up avenues for new types of abuse to flourish. Commissioner Copps put it best. Our job is to deny wealthy companies or individuals any opportunity to misuse the DE discount to outbid small carriers, the very carriers the DE program is meant to protect. The order fails that test. So what would real reform look like? Well, first, real reform would mean putting meaningful limits on the discounts that any company can obtain. But the order's $150 million cap is not a serious measure. Remember, to get DE bidding credits, a very small business can have no more than $20 million in annual revenues. Yet the FCC foresees that very small business bidding up to $600 million in order to receive the maximum bidding credit. A small business spending that massive a multiple of its revenues at a single auction is not really a small business, any more than a family earning $20,000 a year but spending $600,000 in one go is fiscally responsible. Our experience shows that the order's cap is a reform in name only. Just look at the last 3 major spectrum auctions. Putting aside the cases where petitions to deny are still pending, a $150 million cap would not have affected a single DE. Even a $50 million cap, which I was willing to support in the interest of reaching a compromise, would have impacted less than 2% of DEs. And the $10 million cap I initially proposed would have affected only 3.52%. And remember, these figures include data from the auction of below 1 gigahertz spectrum and licenses that covered much larger areas than the upcoming incentive auction. So any argument that imposing meaningful caps would end the DE program rather than mend it doesn't line up with reality. Now, the order tries to defend its approach by noting that a lower $10 million cap will apply to some markets in the incentive auction. But the $150 million cap covers nearly 80% of the U.S. population. And in those areas where the lower cap does apply, the playing field is tilted. A shell DE, which can and probably will have a major corporate backer, will get a percentage discount significantly larger than even the smallest facilities-based provider, qualifying only for the rural service credit. Moreover, that DE can bid without needing to raise and spend the capital necessary to actually deploy and maintain a network that serves consumers. Finally, I don't take much comfort in the order's suggestion that a future FCC might decide to impose a $25 million cap in future auctions. Predictive difficulties aside, recent experience suggests that politics, not practicalities, will inform that determination. A second real reform would be putting a bright line rule in place that prohibits large corporations from setting up multiple DEs and using them to get multiple bites of the $150 million discount. After all, what's the use of a cap if a large company can avoid it by simply setting up more than one shell DE? So I propose that we allow a company to invest the maximum amount permitted by our rules in one DE, but that we prohibit it from holding more than a 40% stake in a second DE, regardless of whether it claims a controlling or non-controlling interest in the DEs. I thought this would be a straightforward way of promoting access to capital while ensuring that large corporations don't circumvent our cap by reserving majority interest in multiple DEs. But the order fails to do that. Third, real reform would mean strengthening our unjust enrichment rules to ensure that a shell DE can't just flip its spectrum to one of our nation's largest wireless carriers. The Competitive Carrier Association, T-Mobile, and others all called on the FCC to extend our existing requirements. In my view, we should lengthen the unjust enrichment period to 10 years. But the order doesn't do that either. It allows DEs to sell their licenses in as little as 3 years without having to repay the full amount of the taxpayer-funded discount. This is especially strange since the FCC eliminates the facilities-based requirement, which means that DEs will no longer need to spend capital constructing or maintaining a network, and hence the need for a quick exit strategy becomes less, not more, compelling. Fourth, real reform would mean preventing deep pockets from standing up shell companies simply to siphon the taxpayer-funded discount. I offered a straightforward way to do this. I proposed to attribute a large company's revenue to a DE if it owns a majority of the small business. But the order rejects this safeguard from corporate capture. Instead, it allows a large company to own up to 99% of a designated entity. Fifth, real reform would mean prohibiting any big company that owns a DE from leasing the DE's discounted spectrum. These kinds of leaseback arrangements present opportunities ripe for abuse. But the order doesn't adopt this reform either. Instead, it leaves the door open to a large carrier that owns 99% of a DE and is too large itself to qualify for any small business discount to use up to 25% of its DE's discounted spectrum. And that's just during the unjust enrichment period. After that, the large carrier can use every last megahertz of the DE spectrum. Sixth, real reform would mean preventing individuals who make more than $55 million a year from holding a controlling interest in a qualifying DE. This seems to me to be a common sense way to prevent hedge fund millionaires from getting taxpayer-funded discount. But the order once again rolls out the red carpet. In sum, the order rejects fact-based, common sense, and widely supported reforms that would restore public confidence in our designated entity program. These reforms would have met the test of denying wealthy companies or individuals any opportunity to misuse the DE discount to outbid small carriers. But they'll have to wait for another day. Finally, a note about process. I was under no illusion that today's order would adopt every one of my suggestions. But I thought that there was enough common ground that we could still reach a compromise. After all, we were able to work together on the April public notice and tee up a wide range of proposals. In that spirit, I gave my colleagues all of my requests weeks ago, within days of receiving the draft. And I rolled up my sleeves, ready to get to work finding a compromise. I understood early on that retaining the attributable material relationship rule would be a red line for some. Preserving this safeguard was important to me, but I was willing to compromise and support its elimination if the Commission adopted other safeguards that would prevent unjust enrichment and faithfully implement the Communications Act's requirements. Unfortunately, it was not until 3 days ago that the Chairman's office responded to my proposal. Despite repeated assurances that the draft order was only an opening offer and that there was room to negotiate, reality turned out to be far different. It was the take it or leave it proposition that has become all too common around these parts. On this issue, the American people are tired of taking it. And so I will leave it, and I will respectfully dissent. Thank you very much.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I have concerns about a number of provisions in the item before us. This proceeding effectively comes down to one fundamental question. Should designated entities receiving taxpayer money to subsidize the purchase of a valuable public resource have to provide any actual service to the American people? It is my firm belief that the statute, not to mention common sense, requires that small businesses benefiting from spectrum subsidies construct facilities in order to offer wireless services to consumers. To align today's item with the language of the statute, Commissioner Pai and I both requested edits that would require designated entities to build facilities in return for taxpayer funding. However, these edits were rejected as the majority does not share this philosophy. Therefore, I must dissent. Opponents' reasoning for dismissing a facilities-based requirement is incoherent at best. Some argue that the statute does not contain a directive that DEs provide facilities-based providers. Admittedly, the word facilities-based does not appear in the statute, but the goals of competition, innovative technologies, and spectrum-based services cannot be achieved if DEs act as a mere pass-through, leasing or flipping their spectrum to existing wireless providers. This makes a mockery of Congress's directive to disseminate licenses to a wide variety of licensees. It is also unfathomable that in seeking economic opportunity for small businesses, Congress intended to allow valuable spectrum to be bought on the cheap so that the financial backers of DEs could get rich while large wireless providers, ineligible for the credit, access spectrum at a reduced cost. The item text suggests that our rules need to be more permissive so that DEs can obtain investment and gain operational experience from existing providers. But allowing 100% leasing of DE licenses does not prevent a DE from acquiring the spectrum, leasing it for profit, and then selling it for even more windfall profits. And simply cashing a check does not equate to obtaining operational experience. It just means that the U.S. taxpayers are being ripped off for the benefit of a select few, soon-to-be millionaires. Being told that a facilities-based requirement was a non-starter, I sought other edits to prevent abuses of the DE program. For instance, I proposed that we limit the amount of spectrum that could be leased to any one nationwide provider and entertained other possible restrictions on spectrum use arrangements. This wouldn't completely eliminate the issue, but would have forced those seeking to lease DE subsidized spectrum to find multiple partners when attempting to do so. And it would have accompanied by more stringent unjust enrichment rules. The current rules set the unjust enrichment period at 5 years. However, in today's age of clearing and sharing spectrum, most initial construction requirements fall outside of this 5-year time frame. This loophole allows DEs to acquire spectrum and warehouse it until the unjust enrichment period expires. How can we justify rules that encourage the warehousing of spectrum and so blatantly violate the objective that the Commission promote the efficient and intensive use of spectrum? To rectify this loophole, I requested, at a minimum, that the unjust enrichment period extend for 1 year past the construction requirement, or in the case of the upcoming incentive auction, 7 years. In addition, if the initial construction benchmark was extended, the unjust enrichment period would be similarly extended to 1 year after the initial construction requirement. Additionally, a 100% reimbursement of the bidding credit would be due if DEs transfer control of their licenses before constructing their own facilities to an FCC licensee that is either invested in the DE or has a spectrum use arrangement with the DE. Although these reasonable suggestions serve as safeguards to ensure that only bona fide small businesses benefit from DE benefits, they were rejected because some believe that prolonged unjust enrichment periods scare off venture capitalists. No one is saying that investors cannot divest their ownership interest, but it is highly possible that such transactions would result in unjust enrichment. I understand that investors want an exit strategy and a return on their investment in a set time frame. But why shouldn't the American people expect a similar return on their investment, or at the very least, a reimbursement of their generous loan? The Act also states that there should be performance requirements to ensure prompt delivery of services to rural areas, to prevent stockpiling or warehousing of spectrum, and to promote investment in rapid deployment of new technologies or services. I hope the Chairman will initiate a review of the Commission's wireless build-out requirements to ensure that our rules and policies continue to promote the expeditious deployment of wireless networks by small and large businesses alike. Additionally, although I'm in favor of a cap, $150 million for a small business is too high, and there should have been stronger provisions to ensure that wireless providers cannot invest in multiple DEs, allowing them to aggregate and evade the bidding credit cap. I also cannot support maintaining the revenue exemption for Alaska Native corporations, a rule change that is also championed by Senator Claire McCaskill. Although I recognize that today's item takes steps to correct some flaws in the DE program, I cannot support an item that does not require facilities-based DEs and does not prevent the abuses we have seen in the past. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly, for your thoughtful comments. I'm surprised and disappointed, however, at my colleagues arguing to limit opportunity and to ignore the statute. So let's just be clear here for a second. What did Congress tell us to do? In Section 309J3B, they say, quote, promoting economic opportunity by disseminating licenses to a wide variety of applicants, including small businesses, rural telephone companies, and businesses owned by members of minority groups and women, unquote. You know, one of us on this panel likes to talk about being in the room sometimes when things were drafted. Actually, two of us. I'm old enough that I was actually in the room when this provision was put in place. And let's just think back to 1993 when Congress created this. There were fewer than 10 million wireless subscribers, a little different than today. We were on the path to having 9 licensees in every market. It was possible to set up a small independent company and to go out and offer service. I knew the people that did. They were friends of mine. But 20 years later, over 20 years later, the world has changed. And that change has nothing to do with a series of decade-old quotes about what things might have looked like back then. The fact of the matter is that today, an entrepreneur can't compete with four big carriers owning 90% of the market, 98% of the market. It's an impossibility to just put up a stick like we used to be able to do and start competing. But the statute directs us to promote economic opportunity by designating entities to hold licenses in the environment that exists. Not the environment that once existed, not the environment that is imagined, but the reality that exists. And to be specific, the statute says not one word about a requirement that there be facilities-based retail services. The concept of economic opportunity is a concept of asset ownership. It is created by asset ownership. The instructions of Congress were to facilitate asset ownership. The way you make asset ownership economically feasible in today's mobile environment is to own that asset and then work out the relationship with others as to how that asset is used. Not necessarily have to go out and offer, Tom and Jane cellular service. And so what we're doing is we're updating our rules to reflect the reality of 21st century economic opportunity. Now, you can't claim that you're pro-opportunity and then define it in a way that limits opportunity. I'm disappointed by the contortions of some of my colleagues to deny the opportunity as instructed by Congress, and I'm fascinated that those who preach regulatory humility want to micromanage down to the business model. The matter of economic inequality is a grave national concern. Today, as Commissioner Pai pointed out, on a party line vote, we attack economic inequality in one small way. So with that, I will call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. The request for editorial privileges is granted with the exception noted. Madam Secretary, would you please bring us the next item?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item on your agenda is presented by the Enforcement Bureau. Travis LeBlanc, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Mr. LeBlanc.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Morning.
I am pleased to present you an order that restructures the Enforcement Bureau's field operations. The Enforcement Bureau currently has approximately 24 field locations. These offices resolve interference issues, assist with disaster recovery, develop direction-finding technology, and enforce compliance with the Commission's rules. Our field employees perform valuable work. Many have served the Commission for decades. This morning, in the presence of all our commissioners and the American public, I want to take a moment of personal privilege to acknowledge
the dedication that our field personnel have shown to the Commission, and I want to salute their public service. It has been nearly 2 decades since our field operations have been thoroughly examined. The proposal before you aligns the Bureau's field operations to enable field agents to focus more efficiently on Commission priorities, particularly enforcement of the rules governing radio frequency interference issues. The proposal is fiscally responsible. It streamlines the field's management structure and saves millions of dollars in office and personnel expenses. On behalf of the Enforcement Bureau, I would like to thank the many people who provided input in this process, including our colleagues in the field and throughout the Commission, other federal agencies, and external stakeholders. I also would like to thank John Wilkins, Bill Davenport, Joe Mooney, Tom Green, and Brad Courier for their work on this project. With me to present the order is Bill Davenport, Deputy Chief, Enforcement Bureau. Also with us at the table is John Wilkins, Managing Director, Office of the Managing Director. Bill Davenport will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Commission last examined the Enforcement Bureau's field operations approximately 20 years ago. Since then, we have seen substantial changes in communications technology and investigative capabilities. At the same time, the Commission has been working with flat or decreased budgets in recent years. It is clear that the field needed to be reorganized to better enable our field agents to respond effectively to the spectrum enforcement challenges of the 21st century. The item before you reorganizes the Enforcement Bureau's field operations. Some of the key elements of the plan are as follows. The Commission will continue to operate field offices in Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Columbia, Maryland, Dallas, Denver, Honolulu, Los Angeles, Miami, New Orleans, New York City, Portland, Oregon, and San Francisco. We will close the field offices in Anchorage, Buffalo, Detroit, Houston, Kansas City, Norfolk, Philadelphia, San Diego, San Juan, Seattle, and Tampa. We will maintain a field presence in Alaska and Puerto Rico by working with credentialed local contractors to assist on time-sensitive interference matters. The Commission will implement a nationwide outplacement effort to assist any displaced employees with finding new positions. Finally, we want to say how much we appreciate the hard work and federal service of our field employees. Many of the people affected by these changes are long-term FCC employees, and we recognize the stress that this proceeding has generated for them and their families. Following release of this order, the Office of the Managing Director will provide formal notice to the National Treasury Employees Union to begin negotiations over the impact and implementation of this plan. The Enforcement Bureau recommends the Commission's adoption of this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davenport. Mr. Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Facing us this morning is a decision that is both difficult and painful. We find ourselves at a crossroads, forced to come to terms with stark budgetary realities directed and enforced by Congress, and its ultimate impact on some of the most intelligent and dedicated persons in federal government who proudly and ably enforce compliance rules for our agency in the field. But the difficult, painful truth is this. Except for auctions funding, the FCC has been operating under a flat budget for the past 5 fiscal years, and if we factor in inflation and the impact of the sequester, our purchasing power has continued to decrease steadily over time. I saw this firsthand as acting chair, Mr. Chairman, when in the middle of sequestration, $17 million of our licensees' funds were taken from our budget for government-wide deficit reduction. As a result, we have been deliberating this item for months and now must decide how to come to terms with this uncomfortable fiscal reality. No one in our positions, no one ever wants to find themselves at this crossroads. But as I cast my vote today, I commit to everyone impacted that they will continue to have this agency's fullest support in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Rosenworcel.
Thank you. The field reorganization we have before us is not perfect, but it represents a significant improvement over the first proposal that was placed before us back in April. We keep open more offices, and we retain relationships with local contractors in some of the hardest to reach areas of the country. For this reason, it has my support. But as we move forward to modernize the field and manage the hard budgetary realities that my colleague, Commissioner Clyburn, just spoke so eloquently about, we need to be mindful of old problems like pirate radio, and we also need to do a better job of integrating the terrific smarts, efforts, and work of our field agents into our work here in Washington. Thanks.
Hear, hear. Commissioner Pai.
The Enforcement Bureau's field agents perform essential work. They resolve interference that threatens public safety communications, they ferret out pirate radio operators, and they play a critical role in ensuring that everyone complies with the Commission's rules. One statistic helps to highlight the importance of their duties. During the October 2013 government shutdown, over 25% of FCC employees who remained on the job were field personnel, even though they represented less than 7% of the Commission's workforce. Unfortunately, the process leading to today's vote has not been optimal. The original field office reorganization plan was developed without adequate input from either field personnel or key outside stakeholders. Many have told me that they believe the FCC's leadership commissioned a report in order to figure out how to justify a predetermined outcome. The end result, of course, was a plan that provoked widespread opposition. Wireless carriers, broadcasters, and public safety officials, along with Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill, all spoke out against it. And I agree that the original plan was flawed. To point out just one of the problems, it would have left us without any FCC field presence in either the Rocky Mountain or Great Plains regions, a void which would have made it impossible to respond in a timely way to an emergency in a vast swath of our nation. I'm therefore grateful to the leadership of the House Energy and Commerce Committee for stepping up to the plate. The committee's intervention yielded real improvements. In particular, because we are now maintaining a field presence in the Pacific Northwest, the Rocky Mountains, the Gulf Coast, New England, Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico, the FCC will be able to address incidents in those areas more quickly than would have been possible under the original plan. To be sure, were it solely up to me, this plan would look substantially different. For example, the size of the Enforcement Bureau's front office here in Washington, D.C. has more than doubled since 2008. I believe that it's a mistake to continue to grow the Bureau's front office while substantially cutting the number of field agents. I worry that it's a sign of a greater interest in press headlines than bread and butter enforcement work that is less glamorous, but nonetheless critical. Notwithstanding my reservations, I'll vote to concur on this item. Thanks to the House Energy and Commerce Committee's involvement, thanks to Commissioner O'Reilly's hard work, and thanks to input from stakeholders, including the National Association of Broadcasters and CTIA, we have made tangible progress in improving this plan. And my vote today is a vote to support that progress. As we move forward in implementing this plan, there are challenges ahead. Most notably, we need to repair the relationship between the Enforcement Bureau's front office and its field agents. In recent months, I have received numerous emails from field personnel, and the message was clear. They do not believe that their work is valued. They do not believe that there's adequate communication between FCC headquarters and the field. And they do not believe that the FCC's field operations are well managed. In the months ahead, we need to do what we can to improve this situation and give field agents the support that they need to carry out this important mission. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reorganizing the Enforcement Bureau's field structure has been trumpeted as a mechanism to improve efficiency and make better use of limited resources on a more constrained budget. That is, the Commission will do more with less. I'm all for efforts that realize efficiencies, but given the circuitous route this plan has taken, as Commissioner Pai and others have indicated, and several outstanding issues, I do wonder if expectations are being set too high. As such, I concur with this plan. The item requires that all field agents must now have an electrical engineering background. In doing so, it eliminates the compliance specialist position. While an engineering degree may provide a valuable background for the field offices, on-the-job know-how, management experience, and working relationships cultivated over years in a community very well may prove to be even more important in delivering real results. Even if it's really necessary to impose an electrical engineering prerequisite, more thought should have gone into grandfathering the current 6 employees whose positions will be eliminated. The field offices are the Commission's front line on enforcement. Inevitably, the proposal to streamline field operations generated serious concerns regarding the future enforcement of our radio frequency interference rules. Take, as an example, pirate radio stations, which my colleagues have mentioned, which in several areas are proliferating wildly, unchecked by the FCC. After repeated requests, some language was eventually added to this item, committing to develop a comprehensive policy and enforcement approach to pirate radio. However, it does not go nearly far enough to give me any confidence that the Commission will actually do something anytime soon about the ongoing, escalating assault on our integrity of our airways. We already have a comprehensive policy on pirate radio. The policy is that it's illegal. The only acceptable enforcement approach is that we go after illegal broadcasting operations and shut them down. Full stop. So on that, I was hoping to ask some questions of people at the table, if I could. Mr. LeBlanc, in paragraphs 9 and 18, and I referenced this, we're going to develop a comprehensive policy and enforcement approach to the issue of unlicensed radio broadcasting. This should be something we're able to do because we're talking about a policy and an approach within a couple months. Is there any reason we cannot do this by the end of the summer?
So as you know, Commissioner Riley, the chairman, along with the Media Bureau and the Enforcement Bureau, have been working with the broadcasters to develop and implement policy and enforcement changes that would make our activities around pirate radio enforcement more effective and more efficient. We just had the first meeting of that group approximately 2 weeks ago. You were there.
I was there.
And I am hopeful that we will be able to have another meeting soon and that we will be able to implement changes. Some of them are more long-term, I think, that we discussed. Some are shorter-term. My hope is that the shorter-term ones we could begin to implement sooner, but the longer-term ones I think would take quite some time.
I guess I don't mean to cut you off, but I wasn't actually asking on implementation time frame. I was asking at developing a comprehensive policy and enforcement approach, which I know is already ongoing. Can we do that in the next 6 weeks, by the end of the summer? By the end of August, can we have that done?
I would hope so. There's no guarantee. We have a lot of people that have to work together. There's a lot that needs to be done. But I think that there's a commitment among the senior leadership in the Commission, as well as the commissioners, to try to identify solutions to assist with pirate radio enforcement going forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Since we're having a dialogue here, might I jump in for a second?
Sure.
I think it's one of the things that this is not as though pirate radio has been ignored. I think since I've been here, we've had 200 or so actions against pirate radio, and we will certainly continue that.
Well, I'm looking forward to a comprehensive policy and enforcement approach in the next 6 weeks. Mr. Salad, I was hoping to ask some questions, if I could, from you. Pursuant to the Administrative Procedures Act, is the Commission required to explain its reasoning and rationale for each decision it makes in an item? If you could, yes or no?
It is required to provide the justification required for judicial review.
And that gives me a second. Is it true that if the Commission does not do this, it can provide a potential litigation risk for a court to overturn a Commission decision? Yes or no?
The standard of review is not the same in every instance, Commissioner, and depending on the standard of review, the obligation on the Commission can differ.
Sure, and potential litigation risk is what I was saying, yes.
Correct, and the potential litigation risk needs to be measured against the record and the standard of review.
Gotcha.
Yes.
No, it's yes or no. Similar, you made the argument that the Commission even must consider and respond to each argument raised by a Commissioner in response to an item. Is this correct? You have to respond to the points that we make.
Yes, we've taken the position that where Commissioner issues a dissenting statement, case law suggests that the Commission need respond to it.
Okay. So, as General Counsel, did you have a chance to read the field modernization item?
I'm familiar with it, yes.
All right. So, is it accurate that the item does not explain or provide any rationale for the statutory authority claimed by the Commission to conduct the changes authorized?
I don't believe, with all due respect, Commissioner, I would not concur in that judgment. I believe the item does provide the support necessary to support the use of statutory
I said explain or
authority.
provide the rationale. Does it do that?
It provides the rationale necessary to provide a reviewing court, should that ever come to pass, with the basis for the invocation of statutory authority.
Which paragraph would that be where it explains the rationale?
Commissioner, the order, I believe, explains, for example, in paragraph 2, that the Commission is determined to make changes in the field in order to create a more effective organization within the limit of the budgetary constraint. And goes on and talks about how to better align the field's mission with priorities of the Commission, increase efficiency, enable updating of employees' skill set.
Sure, and then I was wondering where it got to the statutory authority explanation part.
It provides the basis for the invocation of statutory authority through the explanation of the rationale and the public policies advanced by the Commission's order.
Thank you for your time. I got a couple of problems with that dialogue. Several recent items. This order claims that we have statutory authority to implement this plan pursuant to Section 4I of the Communications Act, among others. Now, I do not view Section 4I as an independent grant of authority permitting the Commission to do anything that is not already authorized to do under other statutory provisions. Even if one takes a different view, the application of some sort of supposed catch-all 4I authority is unnecessary. In fact, the Commission has direct statutory authority to organize this and staff the entire agency, including the field offices. Further, we certainly have specific authority to enforce our rules against pirate radio operations and change how a complaint filed with the field office will be escalated. Moreover, 4I is problematic when used here because it's abusing the definition and purpose of auxiliary authority. Second, including references to Section 4I and other vague provisions raises a larger issue because they have been creeping up as part of boilerplate list of authorities and other items. Statutory authority is an imperative for everything we do, and accordingly, I firmly believe that a detailed analysis matching each action to a statutory provision should be included in items we consider. Instead, we are seeing a pattern of including discussion of the top 2 or 3 pertinent provisions and then including a laundry list of other asserted authority without discussing any of the justification. And I just have a big problem with that, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to push that this be corrected, and I will be talking about this in the coming months. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly, for a legal seminar here. Let's continue it. I mean, do you want to opine? I mean, I believe the line was, I do not view. I'm not sure that's necessarily a binding conclusion of the agency. But let's ask the General Counsel.
I didn't think I said it was.
What are your observations insofar as this 4I authority that the Commissioner has raised?
Well, for those few in the room that have not perhaps memorized the Communications Act, perhaps I could just, for the purpose of the conversation, quote the language. Section 4I says, "The Commission may perform any and all acts, make such rules and regulations, and issue such orders, not inconsistent with this chapter, as may be necessary in the execution of its functions." That is language that was included in the original text of the Communications Act of 1934. As best I know, it's been cited by the Commission as a basis of statutory authority going back to 1949. That's not surprising. It exists in a world in which Congress was familiar with necessary and proper clauses, the most famous case of which undoubtedly was the Supreme Court decision in McCullough versus Maryland. And in fact, the Supreme Court has cited 4I in upholding Commission authority, most notably in the Southwestern Cable case. The D.C. Circuit, as recently as 2010, gave an example of the permissible use of 4I. Said, for example, the Commission is given the obligation, for example, to release reports, and the D.C. Circuit said an example of 4I would be a commission requirement on regulated entities to gather the information necessary to make the reports in order to fulfill the statutory requirement. Now, like every section of the statute, Section 4I is not without limits. There are obligations that must be met. But within its statutory reach, it provides a basis confirmed by commission precedent, court orders, and I would say recent usage. My understanding is that this year alone, of course this, as I say, 4I has been used back for a very long time, but this year alone, the full commission, as I understand it, has adopted 47 items in which 4I was used as a basis of statutory authority, 40 of which have been adopted unanimously.
Sure, and to follow up, your time, sorry, Mr. Chairman. My point was that if all that understanding why we couldn't explain the use as it relates to the items themselves in the items. So if it's so prevalent and so needed to be used, why we couldn't include a paragraph explaining that in the items, and that's what I would like to see going forward. Now, that is not the view of the entire commission. That is my view, but I would like to see that going forward and plan to speak on that further. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let us return to the issue of the field offices, and I want to speak to my fellow FCC employees and specifically look at that camera out there because I'm speaking to you out in the field. This was a tough decision, but we have to live within our realities. Congress has ordered that we spend less. This is the beginning of a process that we'll see that everyone is treated fairly in a difficult situation. The next step, as I think has been referenced, we will formally notify the Congress and the Union, both of which we have informally already been in conversation with, including me personally. We will work with every affected employee to mitigate the impact. Now, I understand that we talk about this in terms of a number of offices that get closed. But we're not talking about offices. These are individual lives that are being affected, and we are painfully aware of that reality. While many of the affected individuals will be eligible for retirement, I recognize that retirement isn't everybody's goal. And so we will retain outplacement services and develop other services to help with these individuals who have, as a result of our actions, been placed in this situation. We've been told by Congress, and let me quote here, to do less with less. I understand that Congress won't fund our requests. As Commissioner Clyburn pointed out, even a flat budget is a reduction, and 5 years of flat budget is a serious reduction. But I do reject the do less idea. So we have to look at new approaches to do more with less. To the employees who will remain in the field, I've met with you. I've heard your stories about how your equipment was out of date, but we didn't have the money to pay for it. We'll fix that. We will give you the tools to increase your dedicated productivity. We've heard you. And to those who count on our field presence, we'll be there. We'll be there for you. The goal isn't to maintain our services. The goal is to improve them, given the realities that we have to exist in. And so with that, I will call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The item carries. Editorial privileges are granted and the exception is noted. Madam Secretary.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, as mentioned at the beginning of the meeting today, you will consider a consent agenda composed of the items listed 1 through 9 under the consent agenda portion of the Commission Sunshine Notice. For your convenience during this vote, I have provided each of you with a copy of the Sunshine Notice.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. For the consent agenda items listed on the Sunshine Notice, we have received no objection from any commissioner. Accordingly, I will shortly call for a vote on this entire consent agenda. If you're voting to adopt all of the consent agenda items, please indicate by voting in favor. If you oppose the adoption of any items on the consent agenda, please vote to oppose, and I will call on you in turn to identify the specific item you're opposing by that number assigned to it in the Sunshine Notice. With that, all in favor of adopting the items, plural, listed on the consent agenda, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. So ordered. Thank you. Now, would any of my colleagues like to make any announcements? Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Chairman, there's nothing wrong with your eyes. If you came into my office over the past week and a half or so, you noticed somebody a little different. So I wanted to affirm that David Strickland, who's a senior advisor with the FCC's Enforcement Bureau, has been helping us out lately. I don't know how happy he's been about it, but he previously served in a number of positions in the FCC's International Bureau, most recently as Assistant Bureau Chief. He's a graduate of the University of Virginia and Harvard Law School. I would like to thank him for his service, thank him for putting up with my quirkiness, which is a full-time job in and of itself, and thank Travis LeBlanc for once again allowing me to borrow some very
is the term I think he.
I think one more would elevate it to that, but I know I'm right on the cusp of being classified as that. But I want to thank them all for their service and for helping us out while Louis attempts to continue his vacation. I also would like to take a moment to offer my sincere thanks to my summer clerks, Sarah Papadelius, Evan Scott and Misha Gutentag. Their enthusiasm is effervescent. They're intelligent, hardworking, and have given and shown a strong commitment to the agency. If you're here, go ahead and stand. I have every confidence that Sarah, Evan, and Misha will continue to do great things. We will miss you, but of course, as always, we wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Rosenworcel? Mr. Pye, yeah.
This is a sad time in the PI office as far as our interns are concerned for two reasons. First, it has come to our attention that they have neglected our cultural heritage in terms of knowing the Jeffersons, All in the Family, Different Strokes, Fact of Life, the very shows that made this country great. But secondly, and more seriously, they are leaving at the end of this month. And so I wanted to take a few minutes to mention them because I tried to persuade them to stay for a few extra days in anticipation of a busy August meeting, but as was the case with the Dallas Mavericks' unsuccessful attempts to woo DeAndre Jordan, they said simply no.
But they stayed for longer than a minute and a half.
Yes, that's true. They did. Exactly. In August, let's start with Ben Sunshine. In August, Ben is going to start his second year at GW. And during his time with us, he has worked on the effective competition, incentive auction, and TCPA items. And perhaps because of the fact that we made him work so much on the last of those issues, he's told us that if we attempt to contact him after the summer, he's going to sue us for $500 per call or text message in federal court. But on a more serious note, Ben has demonstrated just a tremendous ability to master complicated issues and very technical subject matter in a really short period of time. And for this reason, as well as the fact that he was the only one of our summer clerks not to lose his ID badge, I'm confident that he has a successful career ahead of him.
So wait a minute. You recruit your clerks by robocalls?
Well,
is that what you're saying?
I can either confirm
does that-
with Travis
and
sitting
does
right here.
that-
I don't want to.
And does that not, in fact, reinforce why consumers have a right not to be bothered?
To the contrary, Mr. Chairman, I think a lot of people would consider the PI office part of the prison payphone industry, so I think we've gotten an exemption from the TCPA that allows us to make these calls to begin with. So.
We have some reforms in store for you.
Secondly, it's going to be hard to top this one, but Trey O'Callahan, you're up next. So let's see how we do here. Next month, Trey is going to be entering his second year at Duke. Trey had a really exciting summer. He went to the Indianapolis 500. He was at Belmont Park to see the misspelled American Pharaoh win the Triple Crown. He represented Washington, D.C. on its Gaelic football team. I had no idea we had such a thing, but he is one of the distinguished members. And in between all of those activities, he somehow managed to make time for critical contributions to our office. Most importantly, Trey immersed himself in the Lifeline program and was really helpful to our office's consideration of that issue. He probably learned much more about Oklahoma tribal land than he ever expected from this summer, but we appreciate it nonetheless. We also benefited from his writing skills when it came time to draft speeches and statements. We really enjoyed having Trey in our office as well, and I have no doubt that he has a bright future ahead of him also. Last but certainly not least, Christine Beeler, who will enter her third year at Georgetown. This summer, she's worked on VoIP numbering, DE, and the IP transition items. Our rule on assignments is basically if it had an acronym in it, we just gave it to Christine, and she did a great job. She also managed to maintain throughout the summer the Clerk Trivia Championship, which is no small feat. Among other things, she guessed correctly, according to one survey, that Americans have a less favorable view of New Jersey than any other state. Sorry to the New Garden Staters out there, but it's true. And while repeatedly besting her fellow interns in feats of knowledge, that might not have gone over well with Ben and Trey, but nonetheless, I certainly appreciated her contributions to this office, including the thoroughness and diligence she showed on every project, from big issues to the many consent agenda items that we had to consider. I know that Christine's going to have a tremendous year and a bright future as well. It's really, I'm sure it's true for your offices as well, but the interns provide so much value to my office, and I honestly don't know how we would get through semesters like this without them. So thanks to Ben, to Trey, to Christine. We appreciate your efforts and can't wait to follow all the great things you do henceforth.
You're here. Commissioner? Well, I have a couple of announcements. So first, I want to start with a piece of great news. There's an old folk song that says that every time a baby's born, the Lord says, we'll give it one more try. And he has said it for Renee and John Gregory on Sunday. Emerson Dixon Lee Gregory was born. He's already been nicknamed Bean. I tried to figure out how the initials spelled out Bean, but they don't. But clearly he's already a Bean, and Mom and baby are doing well. We're really happy for Renee. We're looking forward to seeing her back and telling us stories about her motherhood. Also want to welcome Mike Dabbs. Mike, are you here? There he is, back in the back. Mike Dabbs joined the commission on the 30th to run the Office of Legislative Affairs. He brings extensive policy experience to the position. We stole him away from the Applied Materials Corporation, where he was the Director of Government Affairs. Before that, he was Director of Government Relations at the Information Technology Council. He's worked on the Hill as the LD for Congressman Rick Larson. I think he's been on the job for less than a month. I think he probably feels he's already been on the job for 2 months. Mike, we really look forward to working with you, and we're grateful for your contributions. And lastly, Sagar, stand up. Where are you? Sagar Doshi, Mr. Friday bow tie guy, but he wore one today. I can't figure this out. I'm out of kilter here. We're going to be saying goodbye to Sagar at the end of this month. Since I walked in here, Sagar has been my special assistant, my right hand, and my friend. And the inquisitiveness, the dedication, the hard work that he brought to that position will always be appreciated. The relationship will always be celebrated. And let me just tell you a little bit about Sagar in one way. He's got a real passion for what technology can do, what technology enables. And that was why he was excited about being here at the commission. And one day he said to me, you know, what we're doing here is operating at the vanguard of civilization. And I thought, wow, that's true. And to see that, to grasp that, and to express that so eloquently is kind of what the essence of Sagar is. He and Jen, his fiancée, are going to get married on Labor Day. So he's got a lot of changes coming in his life. But Sagar, we're going to miss you, and we thank you for everything that you have done in the couple of years that you've been here. Thank you very much. If there are no further announcements, Madam Secretary, would you like to tell us what's next?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, August 6, 2015.
Thank you very much. Until then, we stand adjourned. Noon.
Okay, you guys are already at the table.
Look at this, huh? You know, Marlene's never looked better, I must say.
All right, Chairman Wheeler has a few things to say to kick us off, and then we'll take your questions.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning. I guess we're now good afternoon, everybody. Before taking your questions, I'd like to offer a brief recap of today's meeting and make a quick acknowledgement. As you know, Congress instructed the FCC to reduce the barriers faced by small businesses, including women and minority-owned businesses and rural service providers, seeking to have meaningful participation in the provision of spectrum-based activities. With 4 national carriers serving 98% of mobile customers, it's virtually impossible for individual entrepreneurs to start their own company and compete in this market. And so today's order revamps our outdated spectrum auction bidding policies to provide small businesses a better on-ramp to the wireless industry. At the same time, our reforms will enhance the integrity of the FCC's auctions and ensure large corporations can't game the system. Few areas of our economy hold more promise for driving innovation and economic growth than the wireless sector. We can't overlook the opportunity this growth presents for America and for business. Today's reforms will increase competitive access to spectrum and thus create economic opportunity for small and rural businesses. Now, for that acknowledgement. As you know, we're saying goodbye to a notable member of the beat. Gautam Nagesh is here with his seersucker pants for his last commission meeting. So Gautam, let me be clear one last time. What I'm about to say is on background. Okay? I will deny this is not an on-the-record statement. You can summarize what was said, but you can't directly quote it. And if you do attribute, please attribute to a senior FCC official. I think the greatest compliment that I could pay to Gautam is that I still like him, even though he is a football fan for what at my school we refer to as the school up north. That school, the Wolverines, we can say that word, the Wolverines had a 5-7 record last year. including losing the one-game season for the 10th time. Gotham, however, has had a winning record, and he is going to take that record out of here. His commitment to getting the story is legion. This is a shoe leather guy. And while I may not have loved every piece that Gotham ever wrote, I did respect your tenacity. I do respect your tenacity. You're old school. You're a shoe leather journalist. And we look forward to watching you soar in your next iteration. So thank you for being part of this beat, Gotham. And so let's let Gotham ask the first question. We'll go this way for variety. See, now, after saying those nice things, you can't have a dastardly question, can you, Gotham? Huh?
First, thank you, Sherman. That was very kind. I appreciate it. Last question. So we'll start with something, or I'll do something pretty broad. All the studies show that Americans use more data, both wireless and wired broadband, than almost any other country. But broadband is also, both wireless and wired, more expensive here than most comparable countries. We've seen the president yesterday, or the White House yesterday, announce a program to affect people really on the lower end of the economic spectrum. You've expanded the Lifeline program. What about middle-class families and people who maybe don't qualify for social welfare programs but find themselves strained by the cost of broadband and wireless? What can be done about that?
So, competition. Our efforts are to make sure that competitive sources will be available. We've got an item coming up at the next meeting talking about how do you provide competitive access for businesses to serve small businesses. The comments that I made at the NCTA convention, where I went out and said, you guys you now have the economics where you can go overbuild each other. We are constantly encouraging the expansion of competition. I will reiterate for the 119th time that retail broadband price regulation is not something that we see as a part of the solution at this point in time. The question is, how are we going to incentivize people to build fast, fair, and open networks, because that creates the competitive reality.
Thank you, Chairman.
We'll miss you. Okay, let's go down. Let's do it this way. We'll just go out. Okay, Brian. We'll just go one, boom, boom. Hey, a little variety here. Keep you on your toes.
Mr. Chairman. Just to piggyback on Gotham's question, does that mean that your answer to Senator Sanders and other senators' letter from last week is no, you're not going to investigate the?
No, it's really interesting. I've read that letter yet again. And what they asked for 4 specific things. Give us data on. And we've got data from our cable price survey and other kinds of things. We don't necessarily have it in the kind of granularity that they have asked for in the letter. There was a specific question that was considered on the Form 477, which is the annual report that we send to carriers and MSOs, asking for price information. And the commission made a decision before I got here not to include price questions in the 477. And so what I think what we're going to do is we're going to respond with the information that we have and identify potential sources of other information. Dave. Oh, we're going to.
2 Daves on either side.
Chairman, can you talk a little bit about why the FCC pulled those two auction items? What is left resolved, and when will you proceed with the votes?
Sure, happy to, Dave. This is hard work, you know. There has never been a spectrum auction like this in the world. The job that Gary Epstein and Howard Simons and the auction task force are doing is fabulous and incredibly difficult. I mean, literally. I mean, these are the Wright brothers of spectrum auction. And in the midst of that, you know, there are difficult issues to resolve that people will disagree on. We're going to fly off the hill in Kitty Hawk. And I'm confident that we'll do it in a thoughtful, balanced way, and then we'll be able to do it at the next meeting.
Could I just ask if you could summarize, like, the key issues that are left unresolved? Is one the spectrum reserve?
Well, you know the issues. They're all this. You know. The other day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You just said you think it can be resolved in the next meeting, but I'm curious, because there was some reporting to suggest to the contrary, whether or not at the time you and your staff decided to pull the item, did you believe you had the votes to get it passed?
Did we have the votes to get it passed?
I mean, when you decided...
So I think that that's the relevant question is did we pull the item to create an opportunity for 3 weeks additional discussion of the key kinds of issues that Dave referenced? That's what was going on here. I feel comfortable that we will be able to issue a PN next month in 3 weeks.
Thank you. I'm sorry, one quick. Did you think that if it had come up today, though, would it have passed?
You know, let me be specific that we are working towards a solution that will make sure that there is a majority vote, and when we bring it up, that'll happen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Kagan.
Got it.
So yeah, piggybacking off of that, is 3 weeks enough? I mean, you know, the mantra we've been hearing from Gordon Smith for 2-3 years is it's better to get it done right than done right now. Why not just get it to where the broadcasters are about as happy as they're going to be? Obviously, the appetite among the carriers for low-band spectrum isn't going anywhere.
Well, I guess the first question is, can you use the blanket term broadcasters and attribute one opinion to them? There is one group of broadcasters that is anxious to realize the economic value of their asset. There's another group of broadcasters that is worried about what the after effects might be. And as somebody who had a little experience in Gordon Smith's job in a couple of previous iterations, I can understand the challenge that he's got with a constituency that is of a couple of minds. But look, let's be clear here. There is no new information that has been put out. There was an analysis of previously extant information. There has been the ability since the first of the year, since the end of last year, since December, for anyone to run their own simulations. The data that is necessary to run those simulations is out there. We've made it out there. I mean, you know, in May we said, here are the channels that are available for reassignment. In December, we decided the formula for determining interference between TV and mobile. And in December, we put out the optimization formula. And let's just understand what the optimization formula is. Because, I mean, there's a lot of back and forth on this, but let's understand what's going on. We said, here's the formula by which you can simulate what's going to happen. Here are our data points for I6 interference, and here is our data points for channels available for reassignment. Plug them in and plug in whatever other variables you want, and you can run your own simulations. And people have done that. One person sitting in this room who's done that. So the data is there. In an effort to help folks visualize, we put out a couple of charts. But it's no new data. Lydia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of today's action on the designated entity program, can you provide an update on when we can expect a decision on SNR Wireless and North Star Wireless?
Yes, the item's on the floor.
Well, right off of that, what does the item look like? Can you give us an idea?
Oh, now, you don't think we should make life that easy for you, do you?
Hi, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So if the concern is that you want as many broadcasters as possible to participate, and you have this problem with the duplex gap and interference, and nobody seems to like that very much, why not just go ahead and throw money at the problem? Why not give broadcasters a bigger opening bid to attract more broadcasters, and then you wouldn't have to put them.
This is one of the problems with some of the things being proposed about the duplex gap. It's going to negatively affect the cash that's available to buy spectrum from broadcasters. But let's review the bidding on this, okay? First, the duplex gap issue. There are 210 markets in the country. 6 of them may be affected. That's 3% of the markets in the country may be affected. There is a weakest link, lowest common denominator problem here that you have to make a decision and say, wait a minute, should I allow that to infect and affect the entire national situation insofar as the spectrum auction? Because what happens if you don't deal with those half dozen that may exist, depending upon simulations, but that may exist, what happens is that other markets have channels that then will be interfered with and can't be put into the auction. And as you know, there is a daisy chain effect in broadcast licenses throughout the country. So you do something here, it has an effect next door, that has an effect here, that has an effect there, that has an effect in Canada. And so what we're talking about here is that there are consequences to not dealing with the duplex gap. Consequence number 1, there's less spectrum available to auction. Consequence number 2, the amount of revenue generated falls by 25%. The amount available to buy spectrum for broadcasters falls 25%. The amount available for deficit reduction falls 25%. The amount of spectrum available for the spectrum reserve decreases as well once you fall below 84 megahertz, which would happen in this kind of a situation. Our relationship and our ability to deal with the border issues is affected by this. So we have to. So we would make a decision that would end up having a negative impact in Canada, and that's something that we've been working cross-border to resolve. So the fact of the matter is that there is just a whole series of things that happen as a result of 6 markets. And at the same point in time, we have made sure that in those 6 markets, there are alternatives for unlicensed that are greater than those that exist today and those that would exist with just pure duplex gap spectrum. And as a matter of fact, that those extend across the country. And so that's the issue we're dealing with. The joy of the spectrum auction is that everything relates to everything else. And that's what's at the heart of this issue. And I think that the Spectrum Auction Task Force has done a superb job in trying to figure out just how do you make all of these situations work together to benefit the whole rather than just one part or another.
Is the reason that you pulled the Mobile Spectrum Holdings order, which was not referenced in the letter from the Hill and your letter back, because as you said, if you get to a point where you have less cleared spectrum, then that impacts that reserve?
Yeah, these
is that why? Because
it's... And this is that we're going to deal with the spectrum auction package.
Right, okay. All right.
Phil Goldstein.
Oh, you turned the sign around so that, I wouldn't call you Marlene.
Yeah. Thank you. Phil Goldstein from Fierce Wireless, not Marlene. Regarding the reserve, on June 25th, you came out and you publicly stated that you thought that keeping the reserve at 30 megahertz was appropriate.
Yeah.
Have you received or seen anything since then, or do you anticipate seeing anything before the August meeting that's going to change your position on that keeping the 30 megahertz reserve is in the public interest?
Wow, I mean, my crystal ball doesn't tell me what I'm going to receive, so I don't know the answer to that specifically, but let's just be real clear on one thing. There is a spectrum reserve. There wasn't a spectrum reserve previously. There is one commission that created that spectrum reserve. There are some people who are arguing there should be no spectrum reserve. There are other people who are arguing there should be a bigger spectrum reserve. But the core issue is there is a spectrum reserve. So we can't go this way? Mark?
Yeah, hi. Margaret Harding with Law 360. Sorry, I don't know if I was supposed to stand at that.
Margaret, you do a good job yelling. Okay,
great.
I'll repeat your question so the folks online can hear it.
Okay, so my question would be kind of related to the reserve. There's been a lot of discussion about different reserve triggers. I'm wondering if you're leaning anyway on changing what the FCC has proposed, what the trigger might be to get that reserve going.
No, again, let's go back to the fact that, the question for everybody who couldn't hear Margaret is that are we looking at changing any of the triggers for the reserve? Let's focus on the fact that there is a reserve. And that is a watershed policy development to promote competition. Brooks.
Do you recommend that SNR Wireless and North Star get the credits?
I told you I'm not going to comment on the item that's on the floor. So.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
We will now have Bureau press conferences, starting with the wireless item, competitive bidding rules. Any questions for Roger Sherman and company? All right, Roger. Paul?
The commissioner's statements and comparing that with the original fact sheet and background call, it seems like the main points are the same as the order as proposed, as circulated, excuse me. Is that fair? I'm just trying to, we don't have the text, but because I have to write a story before the text will come out, I just want to make sure that I don't incorrectly characterize the item.
Yeah, I believe the cap number that we talked about stayed the same. And the other elements of the fact sheet, I think, are intact.
Okay, and there's the expectation you might have it out today, or you don't really
We're
know?
working to get it out as quickly as we can. I don't know if it's going to be today or tomorrow or Monday, but we're working to get it out quickly. We have to get statements in from commissioners and things like that.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Anyone else?
Commissioner Pai made several references in his dissenting statement about the fact that a designated entity under these rules could basically flip 100% of the spectrum that they acquired to a nationwide provider. Is that, accurate? And what does the order say on that front?
Well, it's hard to respond to hypotheticals, but we think the rule package provides flexibility to DEs and small businesses and allows them to create innovative new business models at the same time as providing the Commission the tools it needs to guard against abuse. We absolutely did, however, provide flexibility with regard to leasing, and we're putting DEs on the same footing as non-DEs with regard to the options they have in the marketplace to compete.
Any others? Okay, thank you. Are there questions for the Enforcement Bureau? Okay. Travis and Bill, come on up.
So, Bill, you had addressed the NIPSTIC meeting a month or two ago, and you had given some numbers. And I just wanted to make sure. So, under what was adopted, let me ask this: how many field office employees are there now? And then, how many field office employees would be leaving under the plan adopted today? Let me ask it like that.
So there are currently 98 employees in the field, and the number of employees after reorganization is 54.
And then let me ask you the plan, the revised. I compared what the press release and the presentation said to what was earlier, what had been the modified plan that the chairman had agreed to with the House Energy and Commerce. And it looks like a couple is just a matter of how you define a couple offices that will have contract staff. But it looks like the number of offices and how they will be staffed is the same as that modified proposal announced with the House Energy and Commerce Committee in terms of the offices open, whether they would have a contract or FCC employees and that type of thing. Is that accurate?
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Further questions? All right, thank you very much. I think Commissioner Pai and Commissioner O'Reilly will have a press conference now. Thanks.
I look forward to the questions. I just want to make a quick statement with respect to the DE issue. From the dais, one of our colleagues said, and quoting Brooks, quoting our colleague, the matter of economic inequality is a grave national concern. Today, we attack economic inequality in one small way. And I would submit that is simply a surreal reading of what happened at the FCC today. For example, when I proposed a limitation that would prohibit any individual who's making $55 million or more every year from having a controlling interest in a designated entity, it seemed to me that'd be a straightforward way of making sure that we limit the program to people who aren't just speculating but are actually going to use this asset toward the public interest. That amendment was rejected, as were a number of other amendments designed to ensure that this doesn't benefit arbitrageurs and speculators. And so I suppose what we heard was technically correct in the sense that we are enabling the top 1/10 of 1% to make it to the top 100th of 1% in terms of the economic strata of this country. But otherwise, it's simply absurd to suggest that the revisions of the designated entity rules, and specifically allowing an entity getting a taxpayer-funded discount to flip all of that spectrum to a major wireless carrier, it has nothing to do with economic inequality. It has everything to do with consolidating the marketplace even further, limiting competition, and ultimately making the consumer pay for less in terms of spectrum. And with that, I think, unless Commissioner O'Reilly has anything?
Brooks, we went with you last time, so you get to go first.
So, do North Star and SNR get to keep their DEs?
I'm not going to make any comments about a restricted proceeding.
It is restricted. I'm prohibited from commenting on it, so apologize.
The chairman said you guys would comment, so that's why we asked.
I actually saw the chairman, so that's not true.
Well, we just commented, right? We said we wouldn't have any comments.
Hi, Phil Goldstein from Fierce Wireless. Both of you on the dais made comments about the fact that getting rid of the requirement for facilities-based service was, a major factor in your dissents. The chairman then said in response that the statute says nothing specific about facilities-based facilities-based services. Where's the space there?
I think it's pretty simple. I stand in the shoes of my predecessor commissioners, Democrats and Republicans, who consistently and unanimously for the better part of 25 years have held that the interpretation of 309J is, as I suggested, focused on facilities-based competition. The statute specifically says provision of services. And the agency consistently has said, and unanimously, that there is no exception beyond facilities-based competition, that provision of services means that the person getting the discount has to provide services. It seems pretty straightforward to me. And that's confirmed in the legislative history, where the agency noted that Congress, specifically in a conference report, suggested that it was focused on targeting these discounts on people who would enter the wireless market. And it doesn't even matter whether the marketplace structure is different in 1993 than it is in 2015. If anything, the greater consolidation suggests that the agency should really be targeting these discounts on people who are going to enter the wireless market. If we're going to have a small business program, the economic model for it shouldn't shift to simply arbitrage to allow people to rack up multi-million-dollar discounts at taxpayer expense and provide zero service and just flip it to the largest carriers. The model should be more focused on making sure that a small business program benefits small businesses. And by the way, I should add also just one correction. All of the quotations I used from Commissioner Copps in particular, who took the position that there was no legal exception for non-facilities-based competition here, all of those quotes were within the last decade. So it's not as if I'm trotting out something from 1993 that's stale.
I would agree with my colleague and also say that I actually referenced this in my statement, and hopefully we'll get that out to you soon, expecting them to say this point, expecting someone to raise this point. And yes, I acknowledged in my statement the facilities-based is not contained in the statute. But to accomplish the other goals in the statute, the other items in the statute, you have to get to facilities-based, in addition to the point my colleague just made on the provisioning part. So to do the one, you have to do the others. To do the others, you have to do the one. And here they're just saying, that's okay, you should be allowed to lease out your entire spectrum and basically be a pass-through. And I just do not agree with that.
Talk a little bit about the items that were pulled, and I know Commissioner Pai, you talked about recommending an en banc hearing on some of these issues. Are your concerns mostly process, or did you have problems with some of the things like putting my favorite thing, putting stations in the duplex gap? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Thanks for the question, Katie. I think it was both in terms of process and in substance. With respect to process, my concern was that, number one, the agency had not released all of the data necessary for the public to submit input. Number two, that the agency unilaterally and without a commission vote extended sunshine and distributed some of this information on a Friday night and didn't give the public adequate time to digest that data and submit input to us. And number three, that in turn the commissioners' offices wouldn't have time, had the item gone forward, to meaningfully evaluate that information. And finally, in terms of substance, my concern was that there seems to be widespread opposition to placing broadcasters in the duplex gap from unlicensed advocates, from broadcasters themselves, and from wireless carriers. And so my suggestion was, to the extent the item has now been placed on the August agenda, why don't we have an on-bank hearing in the last week of July to allow a full airing of views, and rather than a series of seriatim ex partes where one party says, no, the world, the sky is blue, and the next party says in a separate meeting the sky is green, why not allow the direct clash of perspectives so that we can reach a more informed judgment? That seems to me to be a reasonable way forward.
I would agree with my colleague on many of his points to say it was both process and substance, but more on substance in my case. We actually didn't get to the point, and hopefully will in the next couple of weeks, on substantive disagreements that we've had on the item so far. I personally have articulated already and continue my viewpoint that we shouldn't place broadcasters in the duplex gap. I also don't want to place them in the uplink or the downlink. There's ways to go about that. Part of the problem, I think that the chairman talked about the documents that were released. Part of the difficulty with the documents that were released were that until later, Friday afternoon, we didn't get a lot of the assumptions that went into them. And so we tried to get more data from the folks that put it out and tried to understand for ourselves. Because the point had been made, well, you have all this information, you can run the simulations yourself. And I get that. But when you look at this document itself and you're trying to figure out what assumptions went into this to get to the numbers they got to, tell us more, they wouldn't provide that until Friday when you started to see some of the things get more clarity, and that raised even more questions. So I think that's problematic for my part on the process side.
Thank you. Both of you have voiced a number of concerns and your own recommendations for the DE item today. Were there any points in the order that you did feel were good public policy?
Please.
As I said in my statement, I mean, there are a few stabs at reform, things like essentially prohibiting joint bidders or restricting the ability of certain individuals to authorize the bidding strategies of distinct DEs. But, again, those types of measures are very low-hanging fruit. I mean, these are collusive activities that are typically subject to criminal prohibitions under Section 1 of the Sherman Act, for example. So it's not that big of a stretch to say that the FCC is civilly prohibiting what is already considered in other contexts a very serious violation of the law. But I think by and large, everything, as Commissioner O'Reilly very eloquently pointed out in his opening statement, or in his statement on the item, everything comes down to the basic question: do you want the designated entity program to function simply as a process in which middlemen are enriched and the wireless incumbents are entrenched? If the answer to that question is yes, then you vote for this item. If the answer to that question is no, that you believe the small business program should be targeted at small businesses, then you would adopt some of the proposals that Commissioner O'Reilly and I talked about.
And I would say yes, there are a number of pieces that I was supportive of. For instance, as come to no surprise, I supported a cap, like I do on many other items. But I supported a cap. I would have preferred something at a different level, but there was a way to get to home. I think it just had the fundamental issue. We were in just different places, and for some reason they feel comfortable that my colleague says middlemen. I say they're pass-through organizations where you suppose you will get some kind of operational experience by bidding in the auction, holding license, leasing it out, and doing absolutely nothing but getting the check. To me, that's not operational experience. That's just windfall profit to the recipient.
Thank you both for taking the time. Commissioner O'Reilly, last month you said, and forgive me for looking at my computer screen, that internet service is not a necessity in the day-to-day lives of Americans because people can and do live without internet access, and many lead very successful lives. I'm wondering to which Americans or groups of Americans were you referring to there, and is there any threshold or point at which internet access would become a necessity in the day-to-day lives of Americans in your view? And I'm sorry, Commissioner Pai, do you agree with him?
Sure. Well, there's two parts to this statement, and one part was I don't believe it's a human right either, and I'm working on a larger document to help flush these points out, but I'm happy to answer in the short term for you. One, I was getting to the point that we are overhyping and oversensationalizing what the internet is in current platitudes of American lifestyle. We put it as high as you can. And I was like, wait a second. There are things that are more important that are real necessities. You need food. You need shelter. You need water. Without them, you do die. You have like 3 days without water, 70 without. You die. These aren't. You can survive without the internet. And if the question was, as part of your question, I think was like, who are these people? Look at I'm not a big fan of Pew per se in their surveys. Some of my colleagues can be, but I'm not necessarily. But if you look at their data from last year, 15% of Americans don't use the internet, and there's multiple reasons why. Some of them just don't see the relevance to their lives. Others find it, financial literacy, they don't understand it, and they're confused. Some of them, a smaller percentage, don't have the economics for it, and that's something we're trying to figure out. But there are reasons. There are people that don't use the internet, and they still survive. They still participate in life as it exists today, and that's what I was getting at. Don't overhype, over-sensationalize what is actually happening with the internet. It is extremely important. I acknowledge that, and if you see my speech on this topic, you will see that I highlight how important it is into the life, but I don't believe it's a necessity that you can't survive without it. And when I was trying to highlight the functions, the 5 things that I outlined for regulators, don't overhype it. That was what I was trying to get at, and I will continue to believe that the case. I don't believe that the internet is disposable and that it's not something that is very valuable to people. I think I highlighted both the personal experience and the economic part in terms of its business intertwined in everything we do. That's different than whether it's absolutely a necessity, and it's not a human right as well. And other people have disagreed with me on that. So I have a different philosophy on that. I think it's important, but I don't think it's to that level.
Okay, so from a regulatory perspective, until the internet becomes something you need to physically survive, you would not view it as a necessity.
Yeah, I guess that's some kind of Tron universe or something where you can't live without the internet. That without the internet you can get zero food or zero water. Then we'll but it has always been, and most people, Vince Cerf had a great piece on this, on human right and analyzing how important it is, and being cautious on how we treat this and how we talk about it. The internet is a valuable tool. I completely agree, and I love what it does. I said in my speech, I love technology and I love the internet probably only second to my wife. So I acknowledge what it can be. But in terms of the things that really surviving as a human being, you can live without the internet, and that's what I was getting at. For regulators not to overhype the issue.
Okay, and Commissioner Pai, do you agree with him?
Well, I strongly disagree with Commissioner O'Reilly's priorities. I thought I was second to Sarah, but apparently not. But I won't be offended by that, nonetheless. Look, I leave to Commissioner O'Reilly, to Vince Cerf, to others much wiser than I am to figure out the categorization of this. But from my own perspective, I think it's clear that broadband is increasingly critical to Americans across this country. And I had a chance to see it myself a couple of weeks ago when I was in Diller, Nebraska. A town of 287 people, pre-internet, of course, it would just be a sleepy town that was simply out of sight, out of mind for the vast majority of the country. But I had a chance to visit CNC Processing in Diller, husband and wife operation that in the early 90s simply would process some of the deer that hunters would almost literally drop on their doorstep. They had the foresight in the mid-90s to create a website, and the website for the time was relatively sophisticated, and they kept it up over the years, to the extent where now CNC employs 40 people, which in a town of 287 is no small beans. It ships to every one of the 50 states and around the world. It has wholesale sales to the PGA Tour, to Whole Foods. It's essentially broadband is its lifeblood in a lot of ways. It allows them to monitor their various warehouses, keep up with USDA inspection reports in real time and with more accuracy. Without that broadband connection, CNC almost quite literally wouldn't be on the map, according to them. And so my goal as a commissioner has been, how do we make sure that everybody across this country, the entrepreneurs in Diller, Nebraska, the folks in inner city Baltimore who have a great idea but may not have otherwise a way of allowing that idea to gain currency, how do we ensure that all of them have digital opportunity? And broadband deployment is the name of the game, I think, in the 21st century, and that's what I'm going to focus on, not so much the categorization issue. I did, actually. I tried a variety of the jerky. The jerky is incredible. They've got it's really amazing. So one of the wholesale products they sell is to King Made, which is a brand of jerky used by the PGA Tour. It's sold by a former caddy, and I would I don't know if I should be, as our general counsel here, I probably shouldn't be pitching a product. But
it's an answer to a question.
But
no paid payment.
No, to be clear, the only thing I gained was a bigger waistline as a result of consuming all this jerky at the plant. But no, it really is a good example of something that, thanks to the internet, has has really thrived, and it was a treat to visit them, and I think it's emblematic of the fact that there are a lot of good ideas across this country that are just waiting for a potential larger customer base to find it. And that's why later on in Baldwin City, Kansas, I talked about broadband as essentially the democratizing effect on entrepreneurship, that now it's not just someone in Silicon Valley or New York City who can have a good idea and instantly scale that business plan nationwide or global. It's anybody with a broadband connection. And I think that's a great thing for people across this country who don't, for whatever reason, live in a big city.
So in light of what you guys were just talking about, not jerky, but broadband, can you talk a little bit about the White House's Connect Home initiative? And did the White House reach out to you on that at all? What was the FCC's role?
As you might expect, I was deeply involved in the crafting of that initiative. Consulted personally with the president repeatedly. No, honestly, we've been so busy over the past week with other things. I honestly have not had a chance to dig into the particulars to understand what the initiative involves, and so I can't really comment beyond what I saw in the trade clips.
I had no interaction with the administration on this issue. I didn't know about it except for the announcement that it was coming. I caught a little bit of the president's forum last night, but just a part of it. I was doing some other things, so I haven't read the document put out by the Council of Economic Advisors, so I can't comment any more than that. Sorry.
Hi there, Commissioners. Regarding the incentive auction, do either of you support a spectrum reserve for smaller bidders, and if so, how large should it be? And if you're against it, if you could explain why, please.
You're my leader. Senior.
I take the position that market forces, to the maximum extent possible, should determine how spectrum auctions proceed. And to the extent the agency is essentially picking winners and losers, ultimately that won't be good for the government, because the lesson that we have drawn, both domestically and internationally, is that it depresses auction revenue. It won't be good for companies that ultimately aren't allowed to bid on that spectrum and put it to the highest valued use. And it ultimately won't be good for consumers, because we either delay or impede the deployment of that spectrum for wireless use. And so, generally speaking, that's the philosophy that I bring to this issue. With respect to the particular question on mobile spectrum holdings, the item that was pulled from today's agenda, I stood ready to vote in favor of it to the extent that it would not have expanded the reserve beyond the 30 megahertz that the Commission previously adopted. And I was disappointed that we didn't have a chance to register those views, but ultimately I hope we do have a chance to make sure that the agency doesn't further extend the micromanagement of winners and losers beyond what it already has.
I agree with my colleague's point. I do not support a reserve, and have consistently multiple times I've answered this question. I don't support a reserve, and I don't support increasing a reserve, surprising no one. I would say that one additional argument to my colleagues, going through all of them, is we're also, in addition, it's also seeking to resolve some decisions that are made by these companies that are now seeking to increase it, decisions they made in the past not to participate, not to do certain things, not to acquire spectrum, and now we're resolving past bad decisions they made. And I don't think that's the appropriate role of government. They chose not to participate in some auctions. They chose other business plans, and now the government would be coming in and resolving their past bad practices. And I don't think that's something the government should do.
Just to clarify, Commissioner O'Reilly,
yeah.
So you're saying the internet is not a necessity, but you're saying your wife is. Is that correct? So no, let me just double check. So Commissioner,
I said I love the internet. Probably second only to love to my wife. I didn't equate my wife as necessity either way.
I think once you're in a hole, you just stop digging. You just get out and you go back to your office. No. So
right now, my wife's a necessity because she's carrying our baby. So,
but is she a human right? That's what I'm asking.
She's a human being.
Okay, look, I have to stop this. So no, Commissioner Pai said he was prepared to vote for it, even though he doesn't like the reserve at all, as long as it didn't increase what had previously been done. Were you also of that mind?
I don't like to comment about open items like this, but I would just say that, assuming the language had been to a liking, then I was in agreement.
I'm sorry.
We're still trying to work through some of the details to make sure everything is copacetic, but I think that philosophically we're in agreement that I don't support increasing
the reserve.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Stop the crowd. We're going to now have one question limit since no one wants more than one.
We have meeting today.
It was a shorter meeting than ever.
August. Yeah,